Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats.
You know, occasionally nostalgia is actually kind of important. And if you're within the sound of my voice, that must mean you are in the seats with, once again, as always, my name is Dave Voigt, and I am the host of this podcast where we interview a wide-ranging variety of industry professionals and not only pick their brain about their current projects, but what got them into the business, influences, and so on and so forth. We just see where the conversation takes us. And if you'd like to subscribe to this podcast, please feel free to follow us on Spotify, on Apple, and you can find every single one of our episodes archived over at our YouTube channel at In the Seats. For updates on all the latest news and goings-on and new episodes and new postings, follow us on social media, either at Facebook, on Twitter, or on Instagram, either at In the Seats or at It's Podcast One. And finally, please join us where it all began over at In the Seats, intheseats.ca, for all the latest and greatest movie news, reviews, and all sorts of fun things under the sun. On today's episode, well, depending on when you listen to it, on this episode, we talk with the writers and directors of The Orange Years, the Nickelodeon story, Scott Barber and Adam Sweeney. It's a film that looks into the history of the Nickelodeon network, telling the sort of humble origins of the network, and really it highlights how sort of fascinating and sort of pop culturally relevant Nickelodeon really was, and sort of the content that they created, from sort of the obvious things like Ren and Stimpy to some other things which really stand out, and because they made some intelligent TV that sort of, you know, spoke to kids in the right way and sort of gave them sort of a certain degree of independence and empowerment, and it really shaped a generation of pop culture consumers, much like myself, that look back on a lot of that stuff with nostalgia. But it's not rose-colored nostalgia either. The film really gives a balanced look at sort of how they did all of this, and it's almost a punk rock story, really, but it's kind of fascinating. And we talk to the guys, and we go really deep into sort of the history of it all, and it's a great talk, and I had a good time with it, and I hope you do too. All right. Now, I mean, obviously, first off, congratulations on the film. I absolutely loved it. And I mean, I think the thing that stood out for me is that while I knew Nickelodeon was a thing, it was a network, obviously, I didn't expect the layers that the film really sort of brought out, and sort of how pop culturally influential the network really was. Can you walk me through sort of the origins of like going, okay, we got to make a movie about this?
Like where the idea came from?
Yeah, we're like go back to the beginning.
Yeah, well, so the very beginning is Adam Sweeney, my co-director, and I on this. We were childhood friends, and we both grew up on these shows. We both, had moms that had to work. We came from divorced families. So Nickelodeon was important to both of us. And it was also very important to our friendship, because Adam moved away when his parents split up. And because of that, this is before social media. So if you move to another city, you might as well be in Siberia. And so we would call each other and watch SNICK, Saturday Night Nick, where it felt like every kid all across the country was sitting on an orange couch watching these shows together. And we would do that, and it kept our friendship together. It was a big part of keeping our friendship together. So that's kind of like the prequel, if you will. So fast forward a couple of decades, and Adam and I we had written some screenplays together. We were kind of a screenwriting duo. We had also worked on various other film projects together, both creative and in our professional careers. And we kind of realized, we wanted to see a film through all the way through, instead of selling something to somebody else or trying to pitch somebody. We said, let's make a film we can create ourselves and see all the way through. And we thought, what about a documentary? We were actually filming a little mini documentary for our day job. And we said, this is kind of like, we could make a documentary. It's kind of what we're doing now. So let's do it. And then those memories of Nickelodeon flooded back in when we were thinking about what would be a good subject. We said, Nickelodeon, let's do it about Nickelodeon. So first we did some Googling and realized nobody had done it. We couldn't believe it. And then the next thing was, well, what's the story there, though? Because Nickelodeon would have a lot of nostalgia, but there's got to be a story there. And then once we found out about, Geraldine Laybourne, Vanessa Coffey, and Sweeney, all those trailblazers, that's when we realized there was an actual story there. And there was a lot of information that people didn't know. They love Nickelodeon, but there's all this behind the scenes stuff that nobody knew about. So that's whenever we said, we've got to do this. And that's when the Orange Years was born.
All right, so you know what? Let's let Adam in, and he can expand on that. Because going into research on this almost feels like you've been doing it all your lives, given how you were fans of this growing up.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say for sure. I think that we did learn a huge amount, though, that we had no idea about, especially whenever it came to who were the visionaries behind the success. Even though Nickelodeon magazine to a degree featured Geraldine Laybourne and other members, I didn't have Nickelodeon magazine, and I think probably even if I did have it, I would have found a way to like skirt towards the people that I really liked, which were at that time, in front of the camera. But so we learned a ton. It was like a master's course in understanding Nickelodeon and also understanding how programming works, and it's extremely beneficial, both as stars, but also as people that love Nickelodeon. Everybody has bumps and their curves to kind of navigate. But the good thing is, Nickelodeon found a way to do it, and, always stay positive. And I think that that's what attracted us to children to it during that time, and why Nickelodeon still has a huge fan base now.
Now, how did you guys manage to sort of toe the line between being sort of not too much of a fan doc but really sort of giving it a sort of a pop cultural examination and through line? Because I can imagine when you're diving into this stuff, you must have to sort of pull the reins on yourselves to not get too fanboy into it all.
Big time. Yeah. The fact that we were fans, it had a lot of pros. And then, I don't want to say cons, but that exactly what you're talking about was the con, if there was one. Because we brought a lot of passion to this because we were Nickelodeon fans and we knew a lot about it. It meant a lot to us. So that did, that made us really want to handle this with care and love, and really gave us a lot of responsibility to do a good job with this. But yeah, there was that whole thing of like, okay, remember, just because we know this doesn't mean we wanted to make a documentary. Even if you didn't grow up with these shows, you still could learn a lot about how to create good children's programming, and learn a lot about how this little orange engine that could totally change the world. So there were definitely times where we had to kind of rein it back in and be like, okay, if somebody that never heard about Nickelodeon, never heard about Geraldine Laybourne, remember, we've been living this for our whole lives, and we've been living her journey for, the last year, but what about somebody that hasn't? So we just had to say, okay, this is the story of how they got from nothing to juggernaut, and really made sure we put all of those pieces together so that it was easy for people to kind of understand and follow that awesome journey.
And I think that it helped a lot that we had the creators as well as the heavy hitters in terms of talent explaining what it was, right? Because we could have potentially, if it would have been from our perspective, it would have been filtered and probably realistically diluted. So it was really amazing to get to hear it from the people that created it, because they know best what they wanted it to become, and they know best what it ultimately ended up being to the fans as well as to them.
Now, and another thing that struck me about the film is just every subject you got to talk to felt enthusiastic about it. There was never a question of, okay, I'm just sitting here and recounting history, blah, blah, blah. Everyone was into it. Everyone sort of appreciated that moment in time. Walk me through both of your processes of just going, oh, maybe we can get Melissa Joan Hart. Oh, let's try to get this person. Let's try to get that person. Like going through all those motions, because I can imagine that was part of the fun of making this documentary as well.
Yeah, it was a lot of work, absolutely. And it was fun to create really, if you imagine, it was like, it's almost like if you were, casting a narrative feature of the Avengers, right? This is like basically the pop culture Avengers. And so, Scott and I, we just sat down and we kind of had a 3-tier structure where we said, this is the minimum amount of people that we can have in order to give an appropriate representation of what Nickelodeon was. Then we had the, kind of the good tier, which was like, okay, this would be good. We would be happy with that. And then we said, this is, finally we had like, this is the shoot the moon, like we're going for it. Right. And ultimately that was the one that we ended up having. And it was so fun to talk to each other. And also, because it was a work in progress, right? Like we didn't start whenever we created the crowdfund, or even when we started the film, we probably didn't even have. I mean, when we started the film, we didn't have anybody, but we got there pretty quickly, and it definitely was a snowball effect. And so it was one of those things, and Scott can speak about this too, where it was like the Nickelodeon family super tight knit. And once we showed that we were capable of handling the story, like Scott said, with care, then confidence was built.
It was fun. It was really fun to get to reach out to all those different people, and, it was early on. We were definitely thinking, okay, there's probably some people that we won't be able to get, we were always positive and hopeful and knew we would do a good job. But, there's just some people that we thought would be out of our reach. And we were blown away by the fact that pretty much everyone we reached out to said yes, to doing our documentary. We were first-time filmmakers. You think, well, Melissa Joan Hart, because she doesn't do a lot of interviews about Clarissa. She just doesn't. It's not out there. She does now, but at the time when we were making this, she really wasn't doing a lot. Geraldine Laybourne wasn't doing a lot of interviews, especially about Nickelodeon. So, and then you have someone like Kenan Thompson, who it's like, well, that guy's a huge star and he's super busy, because just to do Saturday Night Live is like 5 full-time jobs in one. And then he's always doing a bunch of other stuff. But we got everybody, everybody that we wanted pretty much we got. And that was really cool.
There is such especially in documentary filmmaking, because as I was saying, sometimes film like this can be dismissed as sort of fan love films, or just as sort of, light fluff popcorn that gets shoved into the corner. But this really felt like it understood its significance sort of in the grand scheme of the pop culture lexicon. And I'm kind of curious, how important was it for you guys, especially being debut filmmakers, to make something that felt relevant as opposed to maybe disposable, like other pop culture documentaries can be sometimes?
It was very important, always, from the very beginning. Because originally we were hesitant to even do a Nickelodeon doc, and it wasn't until we found out about the story and the relevance. That was what made us want to do this. The story of Geraldine Laybourne was far more important, and the groundbreaking work that they did was more important than just showing actors and shows from when we were all little kids. As fun as that is, it was always the story behind the story that really excited us. And thank you for saying that. That means a lot, because this is a celebratory story for sure. It is. And there might be people that want it to be a little more TMZ, a little more Tiger King, finding out who was doing who, or who was doing cocaine off of somebody's boobs, behind the giant nose on Double Dare. But
it was Ren.
It was Ren. And for those people, I say www.tmz.com is super easy to get to. You can go there at any time, or rewatch Tiger King. Tiger King does a fantastic job of stuff like that. And we also didn't want to force something. We really told the story as it was told to us, and there just wasn't a lot of, this wasn't a toxic work environment, So is it a struggle to tell a story? It's almost like writing a story about Superman versus writing a story about Batman. Sometimes writing a story about Superman is harder because he's not the oh, sometimes I just want to kill, I'm plagued by the murder of my parents. But it was really fun, and it's a positive story. It really is. But that's the story that really happened. Geraldine Laborde created the opposite of a toxic work environment. And in this world where there's so much toxicity out there, we wanted to show that it can be done, and that it was done by these great people there was a lot of women, and there was a lot of diversity. And we thought that the world kind of needed that right now. And that's why we really wanted to choose this story, is because it is a positive story. And if people don't want to hear a positive story, that's great. But ours is positive.
Yeah. And I think it's easy to be cynical, right? Like it's so easy to look at reality TV, and, right now, I mean, let's be real, 2020 is tough, right? People need hope, right? There's, and like Scott said, because we're huge comic fans also, right? So shout out to, props to the Deadpool art in the background, but I love Superman's story just as much as I do Batman, right? Because people need hope, and they need to know that there's love and acceptance in the world. And that's what Nickelodeon provided. It was a safe space for people, right? Mm-hmm. And there's absolutely thousands of documentaries that are wonderful, that explore controversies, that go down that kind of like dark rabbit hole, sometimes even in pop culture.
Yeah.
Right. And, Finding Neverland or whatever. It's not Finding Neverland. What's it? The Michael Jackson documentary.
Leaving.
Yeah, Leaving Neverland, not Finding Neverland. That's a very positive movie. Very different. But like Scott said, and I think Scott, said it so eloquently, and he's right. We have respect and adoration and appreciation for the people that gave us these gifts. And the reality is, these are human beings that were busting their butts. And the fact that they did it, and they also did it with such a wonderful attitude that was just sincere, which you don't get all the time, right? Like, it wasn't packaged, it wasn't polished, it was beautiful. And they fought against that kind of mentality for so long. So, I absolutely respect anybody that would watch it and that would go, oh, okay, well, this isn't Tiger King. Because we would go, that's a badge of honor, right? Like, Tiger King is amazing for what it is. And that's probably just like one that we would use. But it means a lot that you would say that. And to answer your question, there was pressure but in a positive way, right? Because we held these people up to on a pedestal appropriately. And so that really serves as a North Star. And it did for me and Scott, because it reminded us of the privilege that we have, right? And so we wanted to tell this honestly. And if there would have been something or some type of discussion that would have happened in any of the conversations as journalists and documentary filmmakers for this film, we would have shown it, right? Because that's our ethical obligation. There was none of it. There was nothing. And the Nickelodeon family is full of love. And, for the one element that people, have brought up with respect to like Ren and Stimpy, there's an amazing documentary to watch. Yeah. It's all about that. And those filmmakers are wonderful, and they kicked ass on it.
And I have to say, at least personally, I'm glad that the Awful Waffle was not some sort of deviant sex act that they had a joke of behind the scenes or something like that.
You never know. You never know, man. Like it. Yeah. What I want to, Scott, we never talked about this. What did you think the Awful Waffle was?
I guess if you want to know, this is just me. I always thought it was pulling up someone's shirt, putting a tennis racket on like their stomach, and then maybe putting syrup over that, and then maybe slapping them with the tennis racket or something. So you have the lines and the syrup, or maybe hitting them with the tennis racket first and then pouring the syrup over it.
That's what I thought it was too. I thought it was like giving like some kind of like a branding, like you brand a cow, right? Where it's like syrup, and then you just hit them, and then everybody sees that you're just like Waffle Boy for the rest of the summer camp.
It's kind of a brilliant way that they could, if they had come out and said that, they probably would have been censored. They're like, oh, that's too violent. But by not saying it, it's a perfect example of Nickelodeon's genius. By not saying it, kids filled in the gaps themselves. And it was probably more gross and disgusting and violent than what they could have said anyway. It's kind of like the shark and Jaws, not showing the shark and Jaws made the film infinitely better.
Well, I mean, it shows how forward thinking they were as well, just to be able to give that level of respect to kids, to tell something, even a joke that may have been a little over the line, but done in such a way that it wouldn't set off any red flags. And that's really what drew in so many different audiences to it.
Yeah, you skirt you skirt the line. It's a balance, right? And it's not easy to do, but that's the truth. And Scott and I have talked about this a lot. The thing that Nickelodeon was so smart is that they would take us to the edge, but they wouldn't push us over.
Yeah.
Right. And that's what being a kid and learning to become an adult is about, is establishing boundaries. Right. And that's all that you do all the time. I mean, from the age whenever you're a toddler, right, you're realizing like you're pushing your parents and you're seeing what you can get away with. And Nickelodeon was fun and there was some naughtiness to it in the best way, right? But it was like the friend that that like you both razz each other, but not in a bad way. It's like in a loving way, right? There's a big difference between that and a bully. And so, like I just love that we were in on all these like inside jokes, and like I would have loved to, and I'm sure everybody would have loved to have gone to Camp Anawana. Like I remember there was a time period where Scott and I talked about traveling just to go to like the Griffith State Park. I think Scott has been there before, right? Like, have you gone to right, Scott?
I have. Yeah. But I can remember that. Yeah. We back when we were like teenagers, we wanted to do like a Nickelodeon, like, road trip and stop by Arizona and see the Dude Ranch and then go to Griffith Park and see where they filmed Camp Anawana, which that lake is the same lake as the Andy Griffith Lake at the beginning of the Andy Griffith show, the lake that the kids all hang out at Camp Anawana. It's the same as the opening ba-dum bum bum ba-dum bum bum. That's the same lake that Opie and his dad are playing it.
Now, if we had gone for the hat trick and if it had been the lake for Camp Crystal Lake,
that would have been perfect.
Voorhees, that would have been wild.
Now, I mean, this is something I always like to ask people because I'm always curious to find out about if there was like a moment in your youth or like a movie or a TV show that sort of sparked your entry into the business. But for you guys, was it basically Nickelodeon that sort of got you interested in storytelling and filmmaking?
Maybe.
Yeah, go ahead, Scott. Like, what's one that like got your like piqued your interest?
I mean, Are You Afraid of the Dark definitely influenced what I like in stories, from like both like the horror aspect and the fact that those stories were pretty nuanced for like kid shows. They were always really kind of dark. They didn't have a happy ending, and I think that influenced my. Because when you're a kid, everything always is like the same story. It's like like a fable where in the end it all works out. The little nerdy guy eventually gets the girl at the end, and their shows were their storytelling was way more nuanced. So maybe that, I think that, I don't know if it sparked me into filmmaking, but I think it definitely influenced some of my, like maybe a very early spark, like that. And then like the aesthetics of Pete and Pete, like the rock and roll and stuff like that. I would say it probably influenced me later on down the road because it was in the back of my head somewhere.
One that like I just thought about that got me into it, that kind of is, I think, appropriate. Wasn't Nickelodeon, but it was Good Will Hunting. Because whenever I saw Matt Damon and Ben Affleck, that they had the ability to like there's two friends that could write a script and then they could potentially eventually go on to direct. I think Ben Affleck gets a bad name. Like, I think he gets a bad rap, and I think some of that is still kind of like the Geely Jennifer Lopez thing still going on or whatever, right? Plus he's larger than life. But yeah, I mean, like going back to Nickelodeon, Are You Afraid of the Dark was such great storytelling. I mean, yeah, Are You Afraid of the Dark and The Adventures of Pete and Pete are my two favorite shows out of all of them. But I think it allowed us to especially now, I think it was really cool to be able to work with the creators of all of them, and then have these conversations with them, like DJ McKell and Steve Slafkin, and because they are the best at what they do. And so for them to offer confidence in what we were doing, and to hear little things like conversations when we were first meeting, and they were like, oh yeah, you've got a film here, you have a story here, that means so much, right? Because if the greats can believe in you, then you're doing something right. But yeah, I would say those. I think anything from Amblin, like Steven Spielberg, was a huge one. Trying to think who else. Richard Linklater later, or definitely Dazed and Confused, because he's Austin and Texas based. Like that meant a lot, because he just has such a wonderful approach to filmmaking in different ways. Like he can do comedy, but then he can also do like Before Sunset, Before Sunrise, and like the Before trilogy. So that was a big influence.
There's such honesty in the Nickelodeon, like everything that they produced as well. And I mean, do you think that kind of led to its indie cred, which really did catch me off guard? Because it's like, oh my God, Iggy Pop was on Nickelodeon.
Yeah.
So-and-so was on Nickelodeon. It really did have this, I don't want to say DIY, but there was a genuineness to all the content that really is what drew in so many people.
It's a punk rock story. I mean, it really is. They were everything that you were supposed to do. They broke all the rules, everything the same way. There was all these rules for rock and roll, and punk went the complete different way, stripped it down, made it kind of ugly. The fact that, everybody was supposed to be sexy in the classic rock bands. And all of a sudden you had, all the ugly guys who were doing punk rock. It's kind of it's very similar. And that's what always attracted us to it, was I think DIY is correct, because there was a lot of DIY stuff going on in there where they were saying, how do we make a show with no budget? But the shows never felt cheap. Nothing ever felt cheap about Nickelodeon. It always felt, you can't do that on television. That was a show that they were just licensing from someone else. Even when they were licensing shows, they were licensing good ones, and they were putting it together. The fact that, Nick at Night, which we don't get to talk about a lot in the documentary, but that right there, the fact that they lost their programming that was happening at night. It was originally the entertainment channel that went on to be A&E, and broke off and did its own thing. They lost that, and they said, what do we do? At 9 o'clock, it's just going to go beep, and be off the air. And they were like, well, all these kids in the 80s, their parents grew up in the 50s. So let's just play a bunch of 50 shows. Those are going to be pretty cheap. Nobody else is playing them, and they created this whole identity around it where it didn't feel like it was nostalgia. It was creating something new. I think that's definitely what created the indie cred. When you look back on it, they didn't have the kids with the perfect teeth and the frosted tips and the super dated clothing styles like Disney did. It was more timeless and it was more real. And I think, that's all of that. All of that is why I think it does have a lot of indie cred to this very day.
All right. Now,
and I think,
go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry, but go ahead.
No, go.
Oh, thank you. So, but sometimes simple is the best way to go. Like I look at like Stickly, and there's nothing that is huge budget breaking material there, right? But it's brilliant. And it's something that you think that like that's like a childlike imagination, right? Like that's where it comes from. It's this sense of wonder. And, you look at Face, and there's something to be said for being resourceful. The best ideas can come from that. I mean, I'm not saying our documentary is the best documentary, but the fact that we worked under a budget and that we were a tight-knit family definitely resulted in us coming up with very hopefully clever ways, and also surprising ourselves, which I think Nickelodeon, they constantly did.
And I think this film does too, because it reminds us as viewers and of consumers of pop culture that there was this entity that was really sharp, really smart, and very sort of respectful of the kid experience all at the same time. And I mean, I think that really comes out in the film. And I mean, just to put a bow on all this, because I don't want to take up too much more of your time. It's a dumb question, but I always like to ask it and put a spin on it. You're both on a desert island. You've got one Nick show you have to pick for the rest of your life. What is it?
I have a feeling we'll pick the same one, but I'll let Adam go first. But I have a feeling it would probably be the same exact one.
I think it'd be the Adventures of Pete and Pete, right? I mean, like, Are You Afraid of the Dark definitely would be 1B. I don't think there's a wrong answer here, but I think that the Adventures of Pete and Pete is something that we can pull. You can take something from every single episode, and that will just, I mean, it has so many fun little Easter eggs, and the story is, like Scott said, it's timeless. You know, every episode, it's so rewatchable also, which you can't say about a lot of children's programming. And so that, I mean, that's what, you know, and I think that it would be entertaining also, because if you're on a desert island, whether you're by yourself or you're, you know, with your best friend, there are so many jokes that you can say. Yeah. There are so many, you know what I mean? Like different characters. I mean, Pete and Pete just set the bar, I think, in terms of original storytelling. Are You Afraid of the Dark is up there, but though, I mean, I would probably go The Adventures of Pete and Pete.
Yeah, one of those for sure. I mean, Pete and Pete just makes you feel good. Like it's really hits you on a deep emotional level. That's one thing that I hope we illustrated well in the doc. Is it really, as weird of a show as it is, it like handled some big issues, you know. And so there's a scene in there that we show that, like, still to this day makes me cry. You know, I think it's a very powerful show. And it's just, I mean, those songs, they get stuck in your head. Like, so if I was stranded on a desert island, that show would make me feel good. The thing about Are You Afraid of the Dark, though, is that it did have more seasons, because Pete and Pete only had 3. So you'd have more to watch if you had Are You Afraid of the Dark. And it's going to give you more variety, because, I mean, every show on Are You Afraid of the Dark felt different than the last, because every kid told a different story. There was always a different cast, you know, so I feel like that show maybe would give you more variety, so you're not watching the same thing. But Pete and Pete is going to pack more of a punch.
Well, and we could also get the new one, right? Like, For Are You Afraid of the Dark? Like, that's a qualifier.
Oh, that was good.
We get the miniseries, which is good, which is really cool. What about you? What would you choose?
You know what? I mean, I think it would probably be Rugrats, to be honest. Just
just
from a pure irreverence and needing to laugh because I'm stuck on a desert island, I think it would be Rugrats.
Yeah.
That's a great one. Yeah.
Rugrats is so good and has so many different fun characters. Like, it's like, at the time I didn't like her, but I think Angelica's hilarious.
Oh, totally.
Yeah. Angelica's awesome, but Rugrats is a great choice. Yeah,
it's got kind of it's kind of got, like, exactly like what we were talking about for those, where it's got a lot of heart. Like, they handle some big issues in that, you know, like Chucky's mom passing away. That's big, you know. They had the Hanukkah special, which I thought was pretty cool. Instead of a Christmas special, they did a Hanukkah special. But then there's also, a lot of variety, because those episodes all feel different. Remember, there was some episodes where Tommy wouldn't talk. Like, you were seeing it more like from the adult's point of view, where Tommy didn't talk the whole time. But then the majority of the babies would talk. Some are more from Chucky's point of view. Some are more from, Phil and Lil. I mean, there's a lot of variety there. And there was a lot of seasons to that too.
Wasn't there one with Spike? Like, where?
Yeah, there was. Yeah, where Spike was like the main character.
The dog's point of view. Yeah.
No,
great show.
It was a great show. And I mean, and you know what? Thank you guys for the documentary, because it really does highlight sort of this important and sort of nostalgic moment in pop culture history, but it reminds us how forward thinking a lot of that entertainment was. And I just want to say thanks for the time today, and thanks again for the documentary, and good luck.
Thank you so much. And thanks for having us on. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, guys. This was fun.
Our pleasure. Thanks. Bye, guys.
Bye, guys.